All right, here it is, everyone. It's Donovan and Dino on this Wednesday night, along with Jimmy Donovan. I'm Dave DeNatale, and I knew what I couldn't wait to talk to you today, to be honest, because I knew what we were going to get into. We kind of teased it a smidge last night. Pro Football Hall of Fame coming out with its centennial slate, its centennial class today, and Art Modell was not one of them. I got the sense, and I hope people have a chance to see what you had to say during What Matters Most at 6. For you, because you knew Art Modell for a long time, covering him. It's tough because you liked him and you had a good relationship with him.
I did. I really enjoyed him a great deal, and we had our moments where he would get very upset with you, but he didn't stay mad at you long.
Yeah.
He was the kind of guy. I mean, ownership of a team, and especially the way he owned the Browns, was very different than it is now across all sports.
Yeah.
I mean, the owners were very available, and he was very, very available. He gave you his home telephone number. You could call
Nobody
him,
does that anymore.
You could call him up at any time,
Yeah.
and I have to tell you, he would pick it up on the first ring. And you could ask him a question, he would give you an answer. You could have a long discussion with him. I really enjoyed him. He was a great quote. He was a phenomenal interview. He very rarely said no, whether it was a sticky story or a great story, whether it was the story about Bernie Kosar coming to the Browns, or whether it was the story of the Broncos driving 98 yards and beating them in the AFC Championship game. He did a lot of things, in my mind, that were Hall of Fame worthy.
Yes.
I really do. I believe he did a lot of things that were Hall of Fame worthy. He was, he started to lose some power within the NFL because he was regarded as an old guard.
Yes.
There was a group of owners, and he was a member of the old guard. The Rooneys were there, the
Maras,
Maras were there, and there were others that were there too. Before Jeff Lurie took over the Philadelphia Eagles, Norman Brayman was that his name? Was there. I mean, so he was a part of that. And he started to lose his edge right here in Cleveland when the vote for the NFL commissioner, who would be the next NFL commissioner, took place here in Cleveland. And Art was really the guy that was pushing Jim Finks.
That's right.
Who was with the New Orleans Saints. And he had the old guard all lined up. But the new guard was coming in, led by Jerry Jones. Okay, and they came in and they really stalled the vote on Jim Finks, almost like the selection of a pope. I mean, they just didn't get the right amount of votes. And something that was only supposed to take one day at the most here in Cleveland, over at Swingo's, really, over at the old Sheridan or Renaissance over there. Anyway, it went for days. And as the days kept going on, Art lost the battle, and Paul Tagliabue ended up becoming the commissioner of the NFL. And that's when it started to unravel, and his financial problems started to become more public, that he was broke as an owner, which is impossible in the NFL.
Well, and he liked to say, my business is football. Right. My business isn't oil. A little shot at Jerry Jones, who was, and even before that, Bum Bright and the people who own the Murchison, who own the Cowboys, Bud Adams, who own the Oilers. My business is football. So he didn't have Pilot Flying J or Quicken Loans or that kind of a company to fall back on if he was if he was trying to be the landlord of Old Cleveland Stadium. He didn't have a second source of revenue to fall back on. And I think Jerry Jones used to kid him about it. He's having a hard time keeping up with the Joneses. When free agency started, like with the pursuit of Deion Sanders and Reggie White, Art had a hard time keeping up.
Oh, I mean, he had no money. I mean, they signed Andre Rison, and he had to go to a couple of different banks to try and get the money to give him the signing bonus. You're right. He didn't have the money. I mean, he didn't have the money. He didn't have a business. The Browns were his business, and the running of the old stadium was a big part of that business too. The Cleveland Municipal Stadium Corporation. And but let me, the thing is, he did do a lot of things that you would say he's going to go into the Hall of Fame someday. But But when you move the Cleveland Browns out of Cleveland, that's a killer. I mean, that's the death knell. You don't get to go in a Hall of Fame for doing that because the Cleveland Browns, there was no apathy here. There was great attendance here. There was unmatched passion for the team. And they were so historical. They were such a historical franchise, and he was the guardian of that to move them out of Cleveland was absolutely unthinkable. Now, if you're going to move the Jacksonville Jaguars out of Jacksonville someday, there's an argument there. There are thousands of empty seats. There are, they close off the upper deck of the stadium there, and who knows, maybe they'll save that. I understand, though, that can be a discussion. But not moving the Cleveland Browns out of Cleveland, and when he did that, you can't go to the Hall of Fame.
I always feel like there are like 6 or 7 franchises that are cornerstone NFL. The Packers, the Bears, the Giants, the Browns. I mean, we're all kind of in that group. And, the Browns had started in the NFL in 1946 in the AAFC. It's just unfathomable that it could have ever happened. And I was doing some research. We have a column up, and I've included a link here on both YouTube and Facebook. I didn't know, there's still things about how everything played out that I didn't know. Our colleague Mark Namick, when he was working at the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com, went back a few years ago. There was an offer, a legitimate offer made by the people who were running Gateway and the city and county leaders that Art Modell would have his own stadium, not a shared stadium like he had with the Indians, but his own stadium to go with a new arena and a new baseball stadium. He turned it down and said no.
Yeah, I mean, whatever happened there, he was. It was a very bizarre time. I mean, I remember one night there was a famous night. It was an evening practice down at the stadium during the summer months, during the training camp time. And I want to say the Carolina Panthers were here kind of scrimmaging with the Browns, and then later in the week they were going to play the Browns in that game. And the Browns were out working out, and Modell came out in a golf cart,
as he always did,
at the old stadium, and said that there was a moratorium. He wasn't going to talk anymore about a new stadium. If they weren't going to renovate the stadium, and if they weren't going to take his plans, and he had these cockeyed plans to lower the stadium, and and kind of then build up the upper decks, and it was a bizarre, architectural, framework of a drawing and things like that. But anyway, there was a moratorium, and he wasn't going to talk about it anymore. And in the meantime, I mean, while that was going on, I mean, he was well into discussions with Maryland and the city of Baltimore to move the Browns at that time. So, I mean, it was, and it was also on that same night that happened, and he had this very brief press conference. The same night that happened, the Indians were playing down the street in brand new Jacobs Field in front of a packed house, and the Indians were on the verge of really, becoming absolutely unbeatable because you couldn't beat them there, you couldn't beat them anywhere, and it was driving him crazy that he was losing a grip on what he had as far as, being the landlord and controlling the Indians. He had lost control of them, and the Cavs were going to leave Richfield and come up. So he had lost control of that, but he had also lost his standing in the city.
Yes.
Because the Indians were the new flavor of the month, and there was a great renaissance. And here was this guy, Dick Jacobs, who just kind of came to the party, and Art had been there for decades. And I have to tell you, as much as it was a financial problem for him, I think his ego very much got the best of him.
I do too.
In the entire situation.
I do too. I think it was hard for him to not be, you have to remember for folks who were alive, I mean, in the 70s, but even in the 80s, when you got here to Cleveland, and I remember kind of coming of age, I mean, the Cavaliers were awful for a long time until, the 86, Price, Nance, Doherty, and the great drafts, and then the team started getting better. I mean, the Indians were terrible. The Browns were the only game in town, and they were good. I mean, Jimmy and I always talk to you about this. When the Browns are good, this town will come alive. And, I mean, Art Modell was the center of everything. Like every NBC, I always felt like every other shot on NBC, you'd see Bernie Kosar throwing a touchdown, you'd see a shot on Art Modell hugging somebody.
Yeah. Well, when you did the game there, you did the broadcast booths for the television, not the radio. But for television, the broadcast booth was a loge, was a suite. And he sat right next to it. He literally sat 10 feet from you when you were doing a game, and I had the opportunity to do a number of games from there. And that was, I mean, he could hear everything you were saying, and he encouraged the camera shots of him. The good ones and the bad ones. I mean, where he was just, you know, have his arm if something went wrong, or he was, you know, hugging everybody if something went right. And he always did it in a resplendent camel hair top coat.
Always.
That he always had on. So, yeah, he was an amazing guy. He was an amazing guy. And but again, his financial problems followed him to Baltimore because really by the end of things and his ownership of the Ravens, he was in financial struggles again to the point where the NFL kind of got in and said, hey, you got to sell.
Right.
And Stephen Bisciotti came in and became a partner first and then became the ultimate owner of the Ravens. He just didn't have it. He did not have a good financial grip on things. He really didn't have a good sense.
Not in the modern NFL. No. Take me back to those last 2 years, 94, 95, as you're covering the Browns and you're doing games on NBC. Before the announcement, before we actually, when the word kind of leaked out that week before he went to Baltimore, what was your sense about the future of the Browns in Cleveland and a new stadium and how all of this was playing out as you were kind of covering the team and covering everything?
Well, they had become really, in 1995, and when the story leaked out, imagine now, you're literally, the day that it really kind of leaked out was the day that the city of Cleveland had thrown a celebration and a thank you to the Indians for the great season. We had just come back from Atlanta, and the Indians had lost Game 6 of the World Series and lost the series to the Braves. They had gotten beaten 1-0 in the game. And very, very early in that week, that was a Saturday night game they lost. They came home Sunday. It was like Monday, or it wasn't Monday, but it might have been Tuesday. And we're all down there. I would say there were 75,000 down in Public Square to say thank you to the Indians for a great year, which it was, with the promise that this was going to be repeated, which it did. And the Browns had become really, you know, they had gotten off to a very funky start in 95. Now, 94, they had a great year. 94, you know, Belichick had a great year. I think they finished 11-5, went to the playoffs, lost to the Steelers after they had beaten the Patriots in the opening game. They lost to the Steelers that year, 3 years. They went into 95, picked to win the AFC.
Yeah.
I mean, they were going to pick
Sports Illustrated cover.
And as I remember, they went to New England and lost.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, things started to get funky. And then they played like San Diego. And I remember I was doing the game with Chris Collinsworth. And they lost again. And Modell was just seething. And they were playing in Game 2 of the World Series in Atlanta because the first two games were in Atlanta. And I was back here in Cleveland because I was doing the game. The Browns were playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were an expansion team at the time. And Mark Brunell came in and ran all over them and beat them again. And as much as you're saying something's wrong with the Browns, the city was so gaga over the Indians that we kind of took our eyes off the pitch. So there was a lot going on. And at that point, it really was a done deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he was into it. It was just when it was going to leak out. And how it leaked out was a guy in Baltimore, the CFL was in Baltimore. I think they were called the Baltimore Stallions.
Yes, that's exactly
right. In the CFL,
right.
and they were playing at Memorial Stadium. City of Baltimore and the governor of Maryland called them up and said, hey, you got to leave. They said, why? Because the Cleveland Browns are coming here. And a guy by the name of Mark Viviano, who was working in Baltimore, knew the owner. He got a hold of the story, and he called back here, and everyone laughed at him.
Right.
Everyone laughed at him.
Come on.
So it was a very weird thing.
Yeah, it wasn't until I think Mike Snyder got Art on the phone like on a Friday morning or a Saturday morning.
It was a
Saturday morning.
Saturday morning, and I mean, it sounded like he had been awake for a week.
Yeah.
And he took phone calls from everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was, and then he soon left that day and he went to Columbus to get out of town. And he talked about, you know, I have to leave. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to Baltimore. There's a press conference on Monday. Now, they were playing Sunday.
Yes.
In fact, Bob Golick and I did the game on NBC. And he did not show up to the game. And that was the end.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I always felt that as much as the Indians, I think, we took our eye off the ball or whatever, I think the enthusiasm for the Browns and for Art Modell waned big time after the way the Bernie Kosar situation was handled.
Yeah, it could have, yeah.
And not that I don't think it would have changed anything, but I think the rest of that 93 season was like a lost year, and that's when the Jacobs Field Open, Gund Arena Open the fall. I always felt that was kind of the first note where, nobody wanted to deal with Art Modell a lot of times after that. And city leaders have talked about it. I think Tim Hagan said, boy, if only Mother Teresa owned the Browns, this would be a lot easier of a sale.
Right.
But I always thought that was a point when things really started from a PR standpoint, and Art Modell was a PR guy, really started to go downhill for him.
Yeah, although in '94, I mean, they really they had it rolling. I mean, and it was Testaverde in '94.
Yes, that's right.
And I think to go back to '93 when that happened, if you remember, I think the transition, at least aesthetically on the field, probably would have looked better. But if you remember, Testaverde got hurt right away.
Yes.
And Todd Philcox had to play in the first game that Kosar missed, and the first play ended up being a safety against him in Seattle, while Kosar, down the dial, as they say, as you would say in your old life, was playing in Dallas,
against the Cardinals.
starting for the Cowboys for an injured Troy Aikman. But in '94, I will tell you this: when they were rolling again, Kosar had become a little bit of an afterthought, and they were playing really well. They couldn't beat the Steelers, but I will remember when they beat Parcells, Drew Bledsoe, and the Patriots that day in the playoff game, it had the old feel again.
Yeah.
They went the next week and got beat in Pittsburgh, and it was over. But I think people thought, okay, they're all right, but then, the magic of the Indians and the fact that they came out of the gate so slowly, and then what happened just blew it apart. The sad thing was what happened after the announcement. I mean, the stadium got stripped of all advertising.
Yes.
On the radio broadcast, they took no commercial breaks because they had no advertising. They had strong bladders, the guys that were doing the game at that time. I think it's really affected Doug since then, because he goes to the bathroom about 100 times every Sunday now. It was really sad. It was very sad. It was awful to watch. I think it was awful to experience. I think they liked playing on the road better than they liked playing at home. Imagine that. They liked playing on the road better than they liked playing at home.
Tony Grossi talked about this, I think, one of the last times that Art Modell going to the Hall of Fame became an issue from ESPN, Tony from ESPN Cleveland. Maybe if the Browns were a better run franchise now over these last 20, 21 years, and if they had experienced some degree of consistent winning, maybe the fans would be able to say, live and let live, forget, forgive and forget. I mean, David Modell, before he died, did that Believe Land interview, that same documentary you were on the ESPN 30 for 30, and said, hey, how many more pounds of flesh do you have to take from this? You got a team back. But, the Cleveland got a team back, but as you've called every single game since they've been back, it's not been good football. And while it's not, that's not Art Modell's responsibility in the sense he didn't own the team anymore. The franchise that was here was gone, and in its place has been just bad.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but only for a short period of time. That should have been the case.
Yeah.
I mean, I do agree that when they came back, they were beyond being an expansion team, and that's because the NFL, wasn't going to provide to the Browns what they gave to Carolina and Jacksonville, this instant success that they felt, where all of a sudden you had two expansion teams in the conference championship games, I think their second year in the NFL, and that was because of what they did in the expansion draft. So they completely changed the rules, and I understand what you're saying. But 3 or 4 years into it, it should have really,
should have picked up.
It's on the people that took over the team at that time. And I would give Modell a break on that. 4 years into it, maybe, that it should have been turned around at that point in time. There were a lot of blown picks. There were a lot of bad signings. There were a lot of bad things. There were a lot of bad hires. And at the outset, yes, but I would say 4 years in, they should have had something figured out.
I never like to tell fans how to think. I want you to have your own opinions and bring them to a table. So I don't want to say, I guess I don't want to ask the question, should fans forgive and forget? It's a difficult thing to do. And I mean, I kind of found, I went through a process when this whole thing over this last month, and I realized I wasn't ready to forgive and forget yet. I mean, my team is gone. That was a hard thing. Yes, there's another team here. It's called the Browns. And yes, I enjoy listening to games on Sundays, and I enjoy covering the team and watching the games. But it's still a hard thing. That loss is still a hard thing for me to get over.
Yeah, and I think it's a very personal thing. I mean, I really do. I think, to people that live through it, and have now lived through this, you have a decision to make. I don't think anybody can sit and tell you, you have to forgive and forget. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. Come on, let's lift this thing up. I think it's a very personal thing because people were so personally connected to the team that you have to decide yourself. Where are you?
Yes.
Where do you stand on this? Did we want him in ill health? I didn't. No. I got a boot out of the guy. But he moved the Cleveland Browns out of Cleveland, and to me, that's just unthinkable. But it did happen, and it shouldn't have happened. And I can't blame it all on the politicians.
No, I can't either.
Now Art Modell, when he left and everything, as he reflected back on Cleveland, he also tried to shape a storyline that, hey, listen, it was better for you. I was broke. I was broke. I gave you Al Lerner.
Yeah.
He was a billionaire. And that's true to some extent, but still, the physical act and the way it was done, and the cloak and dagger, and the secret knocks on the airplane, on the runway,
tarmac.
All of that is just it's a despicable time in Cleveland sports history. It really is. And so you just personally, you have to decide, and you have to decide, and I have to decide where the man stands in how you want him to be remembered.
This won't necessarily go away with the Hall of Fame because, this is the 25th anniversary that it happened. I'm sure as we get to October, November, there'll be more discussions. This was, I felt, Art Modell's best shot to get in because of the way the Hall of Fame was doing this with the 100th year and the centennial class. Maybe at some point, but not in the foreseeable future, not where it has to come up to a vote. I can't see it happening where he gets in.
No, I think that this was the last shot for him.
Last thing. Tip of the cap, Max Speedy goes into the Hall of Fame. But I was so pleased. Steve Sable got elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. His father, Ed Sable's already in. The founders and the innovators behind NFL Films. I've always said there are two people or two entities behind me becoming a broadcaster. One was Nev Chandler, calling those Browns games in the mid-'80s. And the other was Steve Sable and Ed Sable, because I would watch NFL Films just religiously, watch Super Bowl highlights, NFL's greatest moments, football follies. You'd hear the radio calls. You and I can sit there and say, oh, that was Bill King calling that highlight, or that was, whoever announcer calling, because I wanted to, it's like to sit and see an NFL highlight with a radio call. It's like, oh my God, what a great job. I want to do that. He brought the NFL, he turned it into, Steve Sable, because of his ability as a writer to incorporate music, cinematography, changed the way I think we look at the game.
Yeah, absolutely. An incredible pioneer, and it put sights and sounds into the game, and it kind of brought you onto the field with players. It was really amazing, and I always enjoyed the check that you got from NFL Films when the radio call was your call.
Yes.
That was always very nice too. And I'm happy for George Young, who got in, who was an amazing general manager with the New York Giants, and who really helped out the Cleveland Browns, because at that period of time, those years that we were waiting to get the team back into the NFL, and before we had ownership, before Al Lerner and Carmen Policy came in as the new owners of the Cleveland Browns, somebody had to make sure there was a football operation, and I have to tell you, he did an amazing job.
Yeah.
He really, now whether or not the Browns followed, the footprint that he gave them, the blueprint, I don't know. But it was there, and it was done with great care by George Young. And at that point, he could have just said, you know what? They want their orange helmets, let them have their orange helmets. But he did much more than that. But his brilliance was with the Giants, and I think Bill Parcells would have to say, I did a great job coaching the team, but he did a great job getting the team for me. Lawrence Taylor, all those guys that he was able to get for Parcells. That's when a general manager and a coach really work together.
Yeah, I was going to say, you want to talk about being in lockstep, that's it. And then I thought about that because, Jimmy Johnson found out over the weekend he's going into the Hall of Fame. And he really helped build that dynasty with Jerry Jones in Dallas, but the egos could never keep it afloat after 5 years or 6 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Still good enough for him to get to the Hall of Fame, but not in lockstep, crash.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was. It's a very interesting day, and good luck to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's going to be a very special time.
Yes.
When all of that gets in, because still to come is the regular class.
Right.
That will be voted upon on the Saturday just before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, our friend Tony Grossi, the aforementioned Tony Grossi, will be representing Cleveland. I look forward to the day when he can put up the name of Clay Matthews for people to vote on.
Well, I know he's very disappointed that that didn't happen again this year.
Maybe someday soon. Jimmy, this was a great discussion. I appreciate it, my
Sure.
friend. Thank you so much. For Jim Donovan, I'm Dave DeNatale. Thanks for watching Donovan and Dino right here on 3 News, Facebook Live, and YouTube.